Wow. Well, shit. It's really such an incredible film, and to see it like this is, a treat. And thank you everybody for coming out tonight in this, pouring rain.
He also produced the documentary that came out last year, The Rescue, and so they developed it, and it was a terrific script.
Yeah.
William Nicholson, and when I read it, like a lot of people, I'd followed the story and I'd felt great about the outcome, but I had no idea about these details. With all the twists and turns, and so I immediately looked him up to see if he was bullshitting the whole thing, because I knew that wouldn't do. But I realized that there was everything in the script and probably more. When it turned out there to be more through the research, and from doing movies based on real events, I've just recognized how much you can discover and apply. And in recent years, even directing the documentaries, which I think informed this to an extent. But I also was very daunted by it.
Yeah.
The cultural aspect was something that I recognized was a huge responsibility and a challenge for me. But I also felt that I had a lot of filmmaking experiences behind me that would, allow the possibility of realizing the potential of a story like this. And I just felt that the themes were so relevant to today. What they proved, the real people, is this object lesson in what is possible through that kind of cooperation, and the way they sort of depoliticize it and just address the problem. Also, as volunteers. See, I was knocked out. Apollo 13, that's a story of people applying what they know to sort of a level that they never expected would be demanded of them.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, they're applying what they've trained themselves for. Sure, the divers were experts, and there were a lot of people, committed, experienced people, but they didn't have to be there. They didn't expect triumph. They expected to feel horrible when it was over and deflated. And yet they just committed to this idea. So I just felt that challenges aside, competition aside, because I knew there were documentaries and other films and TV shows and things like that were in development. I just felt it was an opportunity to actually say something with a film that could also be suspenseful and engaging.
Right. So these guys, I mean, how they're cut from a different cloth. It seems like their pulse beats differently than the rest of us in the world.
Yeah.
Is this pretty?
Certainly in a cave it does, I guess.
Right. I mean, they're kind of either just sort of seem from a whole other time in a way. I mean, are they? Is it an accurate portrayal to a certain extent?
Very.
Their personality.
Very. Well, Rick Stanton was one of our technical advisors.
And that's Vigo.
And that's Vigo.
Yeah.
So, and that was something that Vigo really wanted. He wanted access to Rick if Rick was willing.
Yeah.
And even with COVID, they managed to do a lot of FaceTiming and Zooming. And Rick eventually turned him on to some cavers in Spain, which is where Vigo was, and he thought he could go check it out. And before he knew it, he was in a cave underwater, and it scared the hell out of him. He didn't tell anyone in production. He just did it. That's kind of Vigo-ish. But he relied a lot on Rick, first and foremost for the accent, but so much more about the behavior, the relationship with John, Colin Farrell's character.
Talk about that, because by the way, Colin Farrell just
what a year
keeps on giving.
Unbelievable.
It's like, I mean, really remarkable. And this is the one that would never get noticed in a way, but you just watch it and it's so human and effortless, and these tiny little details that he does. It's just a remarkable, he just has no vanity. He's just so free with himself.
And all the actors took on that approach. the sort of the no vanity. I mean, everybody treated it as an ensemble, and look, the movie became more and more of an ensemble piece. Even after the cast was signed on, I said, this is where I'm going. I'm going to keep discovering everything I can about the Thai characters and their subplots and so forth. And they were all for it, and were just totally supportive and completely dedicated to it. But Colin is a really interesting guy. He's not very much like John Valanthan at all. I think, Viggo's a little closer to Rick. Eccentricities, a sort of highly intelligent, kind of a lone wolf of sorts, but Colin really connected with John, and John didn't get to come on location because he was working and also with his family. But we shot in Queensland mostly.
Okay.
And all the caves were tanks. We didn't shoot in any real caves. Too dangerous to go into real caves. But Colin began to connect first with John about fatherhood and being in a sort of a difficult domestic situation, and yet trying to be a good father and still trying to kind of live on these impulses of adventure and pursuing that. The next thing that he was curious about was John Valanthan's discipline. Mm-hmm. So John runs these kind of mega marathons, Spartathlons or something, I think they're called.
Spartan races?
Yeah. And so, in fact, at a certain point, Colin started running, and he said, I need to look fit. So as soon as he got out of quarantine, he started running. And then he was really getting into it. He said, I've never been a runner, but I understand this, and this is helping me get with the character. Then at a certain point, he said, hey, Ron, think you could get some shots of me running? Like maybe that's how my character's introduced, is just out training, And I said, well, that's a good thought. I don't know where it would go in the movie, and I don't know that on this budget and schedule if we have time to shoot anything extraneous like that. But let me think about it. If I find a spot, maybe second unit can grab you or something. And that was fine. And he kept asking every so often and kept training. He said he was really into it, and he was looking fantastic. And finally, I said, Colin, I don't see a place to shoot it. I don't have time to shoot it, and I honestly don't know where it would go in the movie. And he said, oh, that's okay. I love it. I'm running a marathon. I said, oh, good. So after the shoot, where are you going to run it? He said, no, Brisbane. I'm Sunday. This Sunday. And I said, okay. Well, look, you've done all the underwater diving yourself, which I'll tell about also. Yeah. Your level of commitment is amazing. I'm not going to tell you, you can't run a marathon in the middle of my production. But I will say that, Monday is kind of a tough physical day coming off, and it's you, and I'm not going to be able to change that. And he said, oh, no, it'll be fine. And he did. He ran the marathon, and he finished it. Viggo was there at the finish line, and a couple of others to cheer him on. And it was a great moment for him. And, and the next day he showed up, and he was on time, and his stuff was physical, dragging the tanks over the land and the water. And Colin was fucked. It was a disaster for Colin. But he didn't miss a beat. I wasn't torturing him. Right. I think I got him out maybe like 20 minutes before wrap. I got him off one setup early. But this is the thing about Colin that I'm observing. He's on an interesting journey, and yeah, he's got a lot of technique behind him and a lot of confidence. But he's finding within these projects, he's asking questions. He's a keen observer, and he felt like he grew a lot by sort of being John Valanthan. But Joel Edgerton brought so much to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's another fantastic performance. That dynamic has got to be so interesting amongst these divers. The kind of the way that they talk about him before he gets there, why we're bringing him in. Yeah. And then his sinking feeling of like, that's why you guys invited me to the party, right? Because I'm the one with the drugs. Right?
He played it. Yeah, he played it beautifully. And we didn't have access to all the individuals in any sort of formal way. We had rights and access to certain people, like the real Tanet, the guy on the mountain. We learned so much from him, including the bamboo splitting, which was never anything that we knew about until he explained that an old guy had helped him out, and I said, well, that's going in.
Yeah.
But it was remarkable. Joel did know Dr. Harry, and I'd had one conversation with Dr. Harry, but he had committed his rights to another project, and so he couldn't really be sort of on point for us. But between Joel's just interactions with him and so much sort of public access to the story, Joel brought so many details and nuances, including that little scene where he comes out and they say 4 for 4. Now that was a situation where he said, here, I just read about this. This apparently happened, and could we get it in there? And it was another situation where I loved the idea, but we were just up against it with our schedule. And one day, Bill Connor, the first AD, and is also one of the producers, and I were just conspiring, and we said, well, God, if we get through this and that, maybe before we had to lose Joel, by the way, his wife was about to deliver a baby, and we were going to lose him. Maybe we could get this in. Maybe we'll have an hour to do it. And I said to Joel, I could wrap you at 11, or you could hang around until 7, and we might have a shot. And he hung around, and we had literally like about 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And 2 cameras in the water, 3 takes, turn around, get a reverse on the other guy, so I have something to cut to, and at that moment. And so, everyone was just pulling out all the stops to contribute in every way that they could, and I never had less complaining on a movie, despite pretty miserable conditions throughout.
They seemed miserable conditions. I think when I step outside of the film for a split second as a director, I think I would never have known where to begin to tell this story, and that's what I marvel at it. That you see, not only did you know where to begin, you knew where to look for everybody's story, and you took care of everybody. It's kind of like only an actor could really direct this, because everybody gets a moment. But really, I guess the question, where did you begin, is in the practical way. You're dealing with an incredibly physical film, and you can't shoot in real caves. So you have a production designer, and you present the script. How do you say, what the hell are we going to do, and how are we going to do it? Where do you start?
I mean, it's kind of a multifaceted start. Once we knew we had a company, MGM wanted to make it.
Right.
We had that support and from Mike and Pam, and we went at it. Bill Connor's an AD that I've worked with many times. He's also a producer on this one as well over the years. He had also done Life of Pi.
Okay.
And so we were talking a lot about tanks. They built those tanks.
Right.
So we kind of always had an instinct that we need to do bespoke tanks.
Yeah.
Went to Molly Hughes, who I'd worked with once before. She'd only done kind of small films as a production designer, but she trained under Stuart Craig, doing all the Harry Potter movies.
Yeah.
And I knew she could handle the scope of it, and she just has a great eye for both character detail, and everything that environment can do in terms of feeding characters. And I began storyboarding based on the script, but also the conversations with the divers.
Right.
Where were the most difficult, pinch points? Where were they in the schematics of the cave? Tell us.
Right.
What were the problems? What did they look like? Let's just storyboard them out. Storyboards didn't mean anything. Ultimately, we just had to go in and shoot them. But it just gave Molly a sense of what we need to construct and how we might go about it. It was ever evolving, especially what the look of just the photography would be inside. Right. Because we started doing our tests, we thought we just used practicals, and of course that blew everything out, especially in the water with the particles and so forth, and we weren't getting enough detail. Then we tried lighting it, and it looked like a movie. Right. Then we tried overhead soft, but that didn't seem like a cave either. Mm-hmm. And finally, toward the very end, we came up with the idea of let's not open up the top, let's build the caves, let's use the ceilings, and we'll bury fluorescence in to certain places, and then as they swim through, it's just just dial it up and bring it back down. And this is one thing with the digital. I thought we'd need to do a lot of cave extensions, which is not what we did. But if we did catch an edge of a light or something like that, not so terrible to take that out. And so that was a huge blessing. But so it looks very spontaneous and natural, but in fact, the electricians we didn't get to do a lot of rehearsing, so they had to kind of ride with it. It wasn't like everything was carefully planned, every shot was planned. They were mostly just in there grabbing what they could, to the point where the actors became so competent, proficient. I want to talk about that for a second, but they actually, Simon Christides, the underwater operator, who's a tremendous veteran, incredibly experienced. Andrew Rollins was our second unit DP, working closely with Sayampu Muktipram, who was my second hire, because he's Thai and brilliant. It's a good combination for me. And so they were working very carefully on all this. But at a certain point, we were just not getting that claustrophobia. We weren't getting into those pinch points in the way that I wanted to. Certain shots we could do, Simon could wait for him to come up and kind of get the shot. But he said, I believe the fellas can do a selfie cam. And basically they put the mini on a stick, and they would just go through the tight spots, with one hand. And then they started operating a little bit themselves and following each other in and out and doing some of the underwater stuff themselves. When I said they got competent, when they started training, as soon as they got out of quarantine, we were sort of splitting the days between rehearsals and training. And by now we had some of the cave sets, finished. The divers were just blown away by these cave sets. They just said it's just like being there. And so that made Molly and I feel a lot better. And they're working with Rick, they're working with Jason Mallinson, and Vigo came to me at a certain point and said, I really want to do as much of the diving as possible. Let me amend that. I want to do all the diving. And I said, well, that's very professional of you. I appreciate that commitment. I said, we're not scheduled for that, and we're not budgeted for it, and I don't know that it's safe. And I've always assumed it's not safe, and we're going to have doubles, and I'm going to find the shots and put you in, and I know, you're going to be in there and under a lot, so therefore the training's important. And he said, I think I can do it, and I think it'll make a huge difference. And it's so particular that now that I've learned the technique, and Colin and Joel, and we've all learned the technique, I think it really reflects our characters. Colin was right there with him, supporting the idea. And I did go to our second unit team and our safety team, and a day or two later they came back and said, no, they check out. They can do this. But there was the scheduling issue. And so they voluntarily said, well, if you'll stagger the water unit, I'll go anytime I'm not shooting with the first unit. Water unit was lined up. I had video constantly between both.
I see.
And then weekends, we'll go. Oh, geez. Are there people here from SAG or camera? Shit. We ultimately adhere to every single rule, I'm sure.
What happens in the cave stays in the cave.
People were just fully dedicated to maximizing this, and it. Of course, it only intensified when we all came out of quarantine, and now the Thai cast is there, the boys are there. It's not like we could hang out. We didn't get that socialization because we were still under those guidelines, but at work we were seeing each other. And of course the importance to the Thai cast was palpable. And we all wanted to live up to that. The one thing is that, you can't just do literal translations. It has to be actual conversation. And I've made some mistakes over the years with that, but I've learned to kind of trust actors, work with them to make sure, this is not just an academic translation. It's a scene. And so I had a couple of consultants who ultimately became co-producers who came in. One's a writer-director, the other one's a writer-producer, and they also became really cultural consultants to help us even when the attitudes of the characters were depicted in a sort of a non-Thai way in, Bill's interpretation of what might happen, or my own. But Thai culture is very hierarchical, and it took a while during the rehearsal process and even into shooting for them to recognize that I really wanted to deputize them. I really wanted them to raise a hand if something felt false, and eventually they picked up on that, and it was very, very gratifying, and they were ultimately proud of it.
Well, that's how you get those incredible performances from all of them. I mean, and the kids included. How do you go about finding all those boys? I love the way the structure is too. That you start out with the boys, and then you don't see them.
Oh, great! Thank you. That was controversial, and Bill had written it that way, and then there were some notes about it and some concerns, and I said, no, I think this is really important.
No, it's critical that you don't see them for that. I mean, it's what feels like a half hour. I mean, it feels like it feels days, but I think it's exactly right.
Yeah, it is over a half hour, I think.
Yeah.
Time.
But talk about casting and finding those people and being, breaking through to deputize them, because it's just wonderful, all those side performances.
Well, thank you. Of course, a lot of the actors are very professional and speak fairly good English, so a lot of them are very experienced. The boys were all from the north. Now, North Thailand, I discovered, has a very different dialect. It's so extreme that Bangkok speakers don't always understand everything that's being said. So when I recognized that, and I was actually told by both Raymond and Billy, our Thai co-producers, they said, even in Thailand, we don't always acknowledge this. But I said, I think we must. I think we have to, because Northern Thailand is a particular region. It's tough. I just wanted every bit of authenticity that we could muster. And so then I realized, not a lot of what the boys have to say is actually scripted. There's going to be a lot of improvisation.
Yeah.
We got to get boys from the north, because if they ad lib, they've got to ad lib in the dialect.
Yeah.
And so I sent Billy there. He's the director of the two, and to work sort of one-on-one with the casting. So we're looking at these videos, and we didn't cast kids to character, but we cast kids who we thought could do it. Then during quarantine, started working with them, and Billy was like playing theater games with them and getting them all to bond, to play video games and stuff like that, and hang out, or turn the lights off and imagine that they're in a cave for a half hour, and all these sort of actor exercises, and was really teaching them. When they got out of the cave, that's when I began to sort of be able to work with them, observe them, and that's when we assigned parts. And then the kids who were a little more adept at dialogue and were improvising and so forth got the bigger parts, and we sort of worked it out that way. But we still didn't quite know what it was going to be like. And the very first day of shooting, we were boxed for production reasons. We were boxed into having to do the scene where Vigo and Colin arrive in the cave and first see the boys.
That was the first day?
First day. So I said, well, okay, we'll start over the boys' shoulders and shoot the coverage toward the veterans, and and let the boys find their way. But the very first shot, I learned so much in the very first shot. I had to kind of 3 cameras, because we took the back out of the cave. Molly had built it so we could get camera portals various spots. Had a camera on an arm that got the shot of this kid, with his dirty bare feet walking in the foreground, and then it pulls back just a little bit. And B camera over to the side, and then Sayampu said, I said, you operate, don't you? And he said, only because my movies are so cheap. I'm not really good. I don't think so. And I said, well, sometimes maybe a 3rd camera? He said, okay. And on that very shot, I said, just, go find a place and just go do whatever you want. And he did this great shot that's in the movie. It's on the coaches, as the coach tentatively moves forward, and then he just shifts around and focuses on the coach, rolls back, nails the divers. It's in the movie. And that first shot, and then the take went on. I told Colin and Vigo, I said, I don't know how long the boys will be able to keep it going. You know, we'd rehearsed and so forth. We made it through the whole take, and Vigo came over and said, it's like I'm not going to have to act in this movie. I'm in the cave, I'm with the tanks, I'm underwater, the boys are the boys, and so a lot of that careful preparation really added up, and that's ultimately the way we approached everything in the film. It was about creating that environment in as much detail as possible, and then just inhabiting it. They gave us, they gave us a great gift, and it sounds a little corny, but I hope they make every mini-series or movie or doc that they could possibly make on this subject, because any way people can find themselves to knowing more. A lot of great books written, by the way, that are really interesting, different vantage points as well.
I thought everything at the camp was so skillfully done. It was almost like, I did break out of it for a second the second time I saw it, and I thought, God, he's got a good first AD and crew there. Or everybody just looks like they are not acting. They're just behaving and doing stuff. That guy's smoking a cigarette. Everybody was doing something. It was like, God, this looks like a camp that's really going on. You know, there was no bullshit cross, like somebody going to do something.
I gotta tell Bill Connor. Well, let me tell you. So this went back to, I think I did this the first time on Rush. I built a reel of racing footage, you know, and also stuff from the 70s. And I put it on a monitor, 3 different monitors. And I just put it on a loop and had it run constantly. And then I had everybody from the art department just paste up every color Xerox of everything cool that they had. And, it just helps everyone. I found it sort of helped everyone immerse in what was true. And I certainly applied that process here. And what Bill and his team, Woodrow, Woodrow Travers, fantastic second, soon to be a first, I'm sure. They would build out these, they called them vignettes, and so we would be looking at this footage, and I'd be able to say, here's an interesting behavior. Or they would do a little research and say, here's what they would sometimes do. And then it was a matter of getting our background folks in, not just getting them wardrobed, but getting them schooled. So when they were unwinding hose, they were unwinding hose. When they were hooking something up, they were they were handling the tools that mattered. So thank you. I'm going to pass that on.
It makes all the difference. Or, by the way, even if somebody's just on their phone, just in the middle of all this tension, it's a long day, and every little thing was right there.
It was a pretty tough schedule, too.
What was it?
It was 52 days, both units combined, they were always going simultaneously. And then we did a few days of sort of dialogue stuff in Thailand, which I wasn't able to go for. I had to do it remotely. But Sayampu was there, and the cast had been already pre-rehearsed. And then about a week or 10 days of sort of drones and beauty units and stuff in the mountains, and just to try to get the weather and all that. So I was frustrated I didn't get to go. But it was with the large cast and dealing with the language, because there always was a matter of turning to consultants and saying, are they saying what I think they're saying, and did they say it well, and invention, because every day we were still learning something new and still finding ways to just pack it in to try to just yield as much insight and information as we could for audiences.
Have you been able to show the film over there or have that experience?
I haven't gone, but I was nervous as I could possibly be going into our press junket days, and which were remote. But I was so grateful. I mean, they responded so positively to it. It was a great feeling. I've gotten great feedback from the cast. They're all very proud of it.
I know this is a kind of philosophical question, but could you have made this film 15, 20 years ago? Because there's some part of me, I'm not going to answer it for you. It just seems like all the experience that you have.
I wouldn't have made it this way. I
Right.
agree. I mean, first of all, 15 years ago, we wouldn't have had this much time spoken in the movie, let alone the first, I don't know, 10 or 12 minutes of the movie.
Sure.
I mean, that would have been a huge fight I would have lost, I'm sure, or caved on, you know. When we tested the movie, and it tested really well, it's the highest testing movie, actually, in terms of preview audiences and that kind of thing. And we were driving to Orange County for the test, and I thought, oh my God, 12 minutes of subtitles to start the movie.
Right.
What can I, you know, are we gonna have walkouts? What's gonna happen? And it not only tested well, but you could just tell that, and thanks to probably largely Netflix and a little bit Amazon, people have learned to read subtitles.
Yeah.
And recognize that there's a cultural gain there, you know, as an insight. Yeah, so I was gratified by
They're
that.
just
But
so
the
small on the TV, though.
The doc experiences have mattered. You mentioned the performances, and I felt like, look, it's such an emotional story that the last thing in the world we should do is sentimentalize it.
Yeah.
We're celebrating something underneath it all, sure, but we must not, if possible. So the music and also the way we were playing. It's also the guys. When you see, you know, and the there's a bit of stoicism with the Thai people as well. But I made a documentary a few years ago about the fire in Paradise, California. Rebuilding Paradise, it's called. And it was we just embedded, and for a year we sort of the town was 90% burned and to the ground, and I wanted to just see what the recovery would look like, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about people, and I also learned a lot about people coping and emotions. And sure, we had interviews, but we also had a lot of people's personal footage or footage where, you know, they didn't know we had cameras rolling at you know, group meetings and memorial services and things like that. And a little different than the way you might have staged it dramatically.
Right.
Sometimes more emotion than you'd expect, and sometimes less. And it sort of kind of awakened me to a kind of a reminder to look at these things and don't always do it the way you remember having seen it, you know, in a movie.
Yeah.
So you know, it's all these things continue to provide just an opportunity to learn and grow for me, and which sounds a little corny, but I really love it for that. And by the way, what else am I going to do?
Right. Well, at this point, I don't know. You've done a lot, but it's true, because you don't think of the film in terms of that big scene. You know, there's a kind of scene that's kind of a couple guys sitting down for the first time, because usually things are blocked and everything else, and he's just happened to present the idea that might get them out of the cave, and you just keep the thing moving along in a way that makes you feel that there's a real story happening here with real lives, and it's just it's remarkable.
You choose these things. Thank you. And you know, and the first movie that I ever did based on real events was Apollo 13.
Yeah.
And it was and I've always loved history, and I love documentaries, and true stories. But I was always intimidated to try to tackle that, because I felt like it would inhibit creativity. I actually found that it sort of fueled it. That those details, certainly for me and my personality and my aesthetic sensibility, I found it really energizing. I loved the experience, but the real kicker for me was actually at the very first test screening of Apollo 13, and we still had storyboards in places. You know, I mean, it was really rough, early days, and it was a blind test screening. So the audience didn't know what they were seeing. They hadn't been updated. They didn't know anything about it. We just screened it, and it played great. Played really well. I mean, even then, I already had Final Cut, but I still cared a lot about the preview cards and the scores and all that stuff, and so I was very attentive to that, and it played just great. Although there was one pour, which bugged the shit out of me. And so naturally, I got my stack of cards, and that's the first one that I found. And I'm looking at it, and I can remember it, but I learned a lesson from it. It was, I'll never forget, male, Caucasian, 23, rated it poor, definitely not recommended. No words. It wouldn't really offer any comments. Just these negative pencil strokes, you know. Finally, on the back of the page, it said, rate and comment on the ending. And here he did deign to comment. He rated it poor, and then he said, terrible, with an exclamation mark. More Hollywood bullshit, with 2 exclamation marks. They would never survive, 3 exclamation marks. Well, he didn't know it was a true story. And of course, if it was fiction, it would have been Hollywood bullshit, and they would never survive. But this is why you choose these stories, and you know, this is certainly one of those circumstances.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming out.
Thank you.
I think there's a nice reception.